Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, sitting down for a topic I've been saving for a rainy day. It's not quite that rainy day, but I'm making it so because the discourse surrounding Starfield, I'm not going to lie, it's just been pretty toxic. So I thought, you know what? I want to talk about Elder Scrolls today. And this idea popped in my head when I was reviewing Starfield, which we'll have a review out next week, by the way, in full. So you can look forward to that final verdict on Starfield. But I was playing it during review, and I couldn't help but think of the next thing from Bethesda Game Studios. Now, I don't want to kickstart this conversation in the sense of, oh man, let's start building the hype train for ES6. But when you look at the technology that's in Starfield, you have to imagine, just like any other previous BGS game, all of that is going to bleed into the next one, right? And so, especially with Starfield being, for Bethesda Game Studios, a pretty big leap forward on a technical level, I wanted to discuss what a potential Elder Scrolls 6 could look like, what some ideas I had for the game were, and just kind of spitball a little bit for a fun little video here on a Friday before we settle in for a nice weekend of Starfield. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here and you're into all that nice Bethesda content, whether it be Starfield, Elder Scrolls, Fallout, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing. Little retro rebound plug here. We just dropped a full retrospective on all of the Elder Scrolls games. So if you want to check that out, it'll be linked down below. It's a good time to do so. It's all in celebration of Starfield. We went through the entire Fallout catalog, and now we've gone through the entire Elder Scrolls catalog. It's a nice chonker of a video, but I'm really proud of how it came out, and I'm so excited for you all to check it out. So that'll be linked down below. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk Elder Scrolls 6. So let's go back to what Todd Howard had first said about Elder Scrolls 6. Really the only shred of details we have on the game, and it's a pretty basic one, but it's actually a leaping point for the conversation, where he says he wants it to be the ultimate fantasy simulator. And this is a term, simulator, that has crawled into Bethesda's vocabulary, really starting with Starfield. I noticed they talk about, we don't want to break the simulation. It's important to maintain the simulation. And when I think Bethesda games, I don't think simulation, but I think they may think that because their goal is to make worlds or universes for us to live in. Now, when you look at the scale of Starfield, I feel if you're Bethesda Game Studios, to shrink things down and do your typical Elder Scrolls, if you will, where you focus on a particular region, would be to them maybe a step backwards. And I feel like their starting point now with this new tech, with Xbox's backing, is, okay, what's this crazy thing we could do? And so what I was thinking for Elder Scrolls 6 as a starting point, what makes it the ultimate fantasy simulator, and you got to factor one important element in here, this may be Todd's last Elder Scrolls game. So what is the high note you go out on if this is your last Elder Scrolls game? And through that lens, I feel like seeing all of Tamriel. In other words, realizing the original vision of Daggerfall, but on a modern level. There's a lot of Daggerfall energy in Starfield, and I feel like that's only going to carry over into the Elder Scrolls 6. Which I've said in previous videos, but I want to explore that a little bit more. You see, when we first had the reveal of Elder Scrolls 6, it's assumed it's going to be in Hammerfell. And there are books within Skyrim that I think indicate that there's a brewing conflict in Hammerfell, and I could see that being the focus. And honestly, after Starfield and seeing what a very vast and wide BGS game looks like, I wouldn't mind if that's the vast and wide BGS game and it has its special elements, and that Elder Scrolls stays focusing on a particular region. But I look at the amount of biomes and environments and just diversity and scale of Starfield, and I think, how can you take that tech and apply it to Elder Scrolls 6? And I feel like being able to go from one end of Tamriel to the other would be a pretty massive thing to accomplish for Elder Scrolls. I mean, ES6 has avoided us for so long, right? You have Skyrim, which is this insane game for its time. I know some people are sick of it, and I get it. We've got a ton of Skyrim in our DNA now, thanks to a ton of re-releases, whether it be the special edition, the VR, the Alexa edition, the anniversary edition. There's been a lot of Skyrim. Oh, right, the Switch edition. There's been so many, I probably missed one. So I know some people are sick of it, but if you pull yourself out of that and think back to 2011 when it first released, whether you love it or hate it, there's no denying that this was a transformative game. It's really what I think solidified Bethesda Game Studios as a must-pay attention to team in the industry. Now, I think games like Fallout 3, Morrowind, and Oblivion spoke for themselves, but I feel like Skyrim, with its 70+ million sales and people continuing to buy it over and over and mod it over and over and restart playthroughs over and over, That's really the game that just put them in that place where anytime you see the logo, even if it was 76, you're like, okay, I got to see what's going on over here. I look at what do you do that's as massive, as transformative to the series as what we saw in Skyrim. And I do think making Tamriel entirely explorable could be that, given how many environments that we have seen in Starfield and how you could utilize that. The procedural content that's there could easily be used to make one straight huge landscape. And to me, that would be the start of the ultimate fantasy simulator. I'm not just living in Hammerfell. I'm in Tamriel. I could start my adventure in Hammerfell. Maybe I could start my adventure in Skyrim again. I just feel there's a world of potential in something as big and ambitious as that would live up to a weight that probably by 2030, I'd say, is a safe window to imagine we'd have it by the end of this console generation, being the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. Like, this game needs to be a big deal. I just feel like I would not mind, as a fan, another Elder Scrolls game. But I feel like now, because Bethesda has worked themselves into a corner because they had to do 76 and they had to get Starfield off their chest, that a lot of people stepping into ES6 are like, okay, we waited forever for this one. What do you got for us? And so I feel like that is the starting point. All of Tamriel, starting points, kind of think like Dragon Age Origins, where you had your origin story and your character would begin in a particular area. I feel like that's a good place to begin there if I were looking at the ultimate fantasy simulator the way Todd described it. I think there's other ways that you can achieve that. You can slim down your focus, which after Starfield, I feel like there's a lot of pros to the expanded focus, but I feel like there's a lot of cons. I always have been in favor of a more trimmed down, focused experience. You know, my favorite games are stuff like Knights of the Old Republic. I like a nice, tight hub that has lots of things to do within it, and then I move on to the next hub. So that's always been my love when it comes to game design philosophy. And I would not mind if they just went in that direction. How do you create an ultimate fantasy simulator within a tight region? Well, I think it's, again, about the places you live, the people you meet, the quests you do, because Bethesda always talks about now we want to make worlds that you can just live in, universes that you can live in and spend so much time with, because they've sort of analyzed their own games, and I get why. I think, again, this is where Skyrim comes up as a major turning point for them as a company. They release this game, it does gangbusters for them, and they've seen how it just continues to be relevant. And that's not really the only game they've had that continues to be relevant. All their games, whether you love them or hate them, like even 76, I hate to say, manages to stay relevant. Maybe to a lesser degree compared to the others, but it's still there. It's still getting play than more modern games to this point in time, which is crazy to think about. So they approach things differently. How do we continue the support? How do we make something that you can buy now and play 10 years from now? And so I just think making all of Tamriel explorable is that obvious solution that they're probably gunning for. But I do have to say that I worry about the procedural content that we packed in, just like I was worried about it with Starfield, and those worries came to fruition with the 1,000+ planets promise. You know, it was a big selling point for the game. People were like, whoa, that's so much. But when you see it in action, I think for some people, they thought it was worth it. For me personally, I have yet to really feel it's worth it. I don't think it was worth it. I would have preferred something more slimmed down, but what does a game like Starfield look like without that massive scope, or when you have that needle in a haystack moment, how great that feels? Point being is, I feel if you were to slim down into just say Hammerfell, you could do things like, one thing I always imagined was, given the lore that we read about where there was this brewing war, is you think of the battles in Skyrim and just how they were supposed to feel big and bombastic. And for their time, it was like, okay, whatever, when you're having the Imperials and the Stormcloaks facing off. But there's never been an Elder Scrolls game, maybe outside of ESO with its PvP, that captured war, right? There are tons of wars in Elder Scrolls. And I know this is like a really weird thing to imagine for an Elder Scrolls game, but I always thought of castle sieges with Elder Scrolls 6. I thought of destructible environments. I thought of big scale battles. And I don't know why my head always went there, other than that shred of lore and how you could explore that in a big way. right? What would be a great fantasy simulator is being the commander of an army or being a smooth talking diplomat who can navigate and avoid the battles. Like that type of stuff. If Elder Scrolls 6 can support that level of role playing, that'd be fantastic. I think, and not to spoil too much with my review incoming of Starfield, I think if there's one thing that disappointed me with the game, it's like there's a lot of choice and consequence. Like there's stuff you're going to make choices, you're going to miss out on content, but I don't find enough unique solutions for how many role-playing elements are packed into the game. A lot of the traits and backgrounds are flavor text and not something that you can use to have a unique solution. I've had it happen in like almost 100 hours now. One time I was like, oh wow, I did a very specific thing here. This was cool. I wouldn't have had access to this solution if I didn't have this perk, for example. I just think eventually the vastness of the game chews up those role-playing elements that could be a little more in the nitty-gritty. There's still choice and consequence, which is a massive step forward compared to, honestly, any game they've released since Fallout 3, but that's where slimming down the focus works well. So if they want to go in that direction, then maybe just focusing on Hammerfell would be a great idea. Now, on a technical level, we've already seen some pre-production footage of Elder Scrolls 6. If we're looking at the visuals, this is still a point of contention amongst gamers, and I get it, right? Like, I look at the people who are not like me and many of you out there who really like BGS games, and they see the facial animations that are hit or miss in Starfield. They see the kind of Bethesda jank, and they're like, what? Why do you all love this so much? And when you think of a game that's going to cap off the generation following of Starfield, comparatively speaking, I know it's not saying much, was a massive technological leap forward for Bethesda game studios. And we're going to learn more with Starfield about those modding tools and what the creation kit is going to look like and how they're going to handle next gen mods, of course, since it's only going to be on Series X and Series S. Like, what's the extra headroom going to do for modding on consoles? How's it going to change the game? I talked about this in a previous video. How is Bethesda going to implement a marketplace into Starfield? There are going to be more monetization, business model stuff to get into down the line, but in the terms of a pure game, I think the other thing to nail the ultimate fantasy simulator is get the melee combat right. Like a no more excuses melee and magic system that feels good. Like when I look at Starfield's melee combat, it's better, no doubt about it. Animation wise, looks better. But we cannot have any more of this floating melee combat. I know the focus on Starfield, rightfully so, in a sci-fi universe, are the guns, as they should be. But I do think that we really need Bethesda to buckle down and get the melee combat feeling good, feeling visceral. And if you can combine that with magic, not just the Skyrim, stick my hand out and have a ray of fire come out. I'm talking burning the grass in front of me. I'm talking high level detail. I'm talking unique executions. I'm talking very visceral combat. There's no more excuses for their melee combat. I'm willing to forgive it in a game like Starfield where you have a vast array of weapons, but in Elder Scrolls there is, because it's a fantasy game, only so many weapon types you can have there, right? There are your swords and axes and bows. There's not 1,000,001 different types of guns with different bullet types and different models for it. I just feel like this is something that if you want to achieve the ultimate fantasy simulator, that combat needs to be excellent. It needs to be. Like the fact that I can still play Skyrim's floaty combat is kind of crazy. Same with Oblivion, but it's because they get the exploration so right. Now with Bethesda's new focus on scale and scope and procedural tech blending in with the more handcrafted stuff, I feel like now you need to get the combat better because the game demands it, because a lot of the stuff I'm engaging with begs combat and sometimes less questing, which can be fine. The combat feels good in Starfield, so I don't mind, but in Elder Scrolls 6, if it's going to be the same, it's time to tighten up the melee combat. Last thing, and I'm saying this more so for posterity's sake, if you want to have the ultimate fantasy simulator, I remember reading that you guys decided, oh, it would be a great idea if we at least tried a voice protagonist in Starfield. After Fallout 4, don't know what we were thinking, but I already know y'all, Bethesda, you're going to try again with Elder Scrolls 6. And I pray to God that your end result is the same as it was for Starfield. Starfield is infinitely better than Fallout 4 in my eyes, and I love Fallout 4, but it's infinitely better just by that merit alone. The fact that I can be me. I play your games to be me and read stuff in my voice not hear it. As much as I love Brian T. Delaney, as much as I love Courtney Taylor, I do not play those games to hear their voices replicating my thoughts. Like, no, it just doesn't fit. You are, whether you realize it or not, a role-playing game studio, okay? You can squeeze in the action terminology and the role-playing shooter, whatever you want, okay? But RP is in all of your games, okay? We need to be able to role-play. Please, in Elder Scrolls 6, do not have a voice protagonist. That, to me, those things would achieve the ultimate fantasy simulator, right? To summarize, that's all of Tamriel. That's streamlining the procedural tech. If you're not going to do all of Tamriel, a really tight focus on Hammerfell with a focus on wars, getting the combat right, keeping the protagonist not voiced so that we can have more choices and be who we want to be. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this is a video that'll be fun to go back to in like 6-7 years when we have Elder Scrolls 6, I hope, and see what's going on there, see how right or wrong we were. But I thought it'd be a fun conversation to have on this Friday as we, again, set into a weekend of Starfield. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really looking forward to your thoughts down below. What makes the ultimate fantasy simulator Elder Scrolls 6 to you? Please do fire away. And with that, take excellent care of yourselves. Other than that, I'll catch you around next time. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.